What if Issei and Koneko were cat couples and had kids? The mission had gone sideways in the way that only truly cursed missions manage a euro. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in a slow, grinding accumulation of things going wrong that left everyone exhausted, bloodied, and in Issei Hayate's case, kneeling on cracked concrete in an abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts of Ko City, staring at a sight that made his chest feel like someone had driven a fist straight through it. Koneko Tuju was on the ground. That alone was enough to freeze him. Koneko didn't go down. She was the immovable wall of Rias Gremery's peerage, the small, devastating force who hit harder than anything her size had any business hitting, who absorbed punishment with the expression of someone mildly inconvenienced by the weather. She had taken hits that would have ended Issei's life before Drake ever had a chance to boost his way out of it. She had stood in the rubble of fights that had brought senior-rank devils to their knees and dusted off her uniform like she was brushing away lint. But she was on the ground now, and she had gone down between him and a lancing column of corrupted senjutsu energy that would have punched through Issei's back before he ever saw it coming. She had stepped in front of it. Koneko! His voice came out raw, wrong, too loud in the sudden ringing silence after the explosion. The enemy a euro. A rogue exorcist running hybrid black market jiu-jitsu he had no business wielding a euro. Was already crumpled against the far wall, courtesy of a boosted gear amplified punch that Issei had thrown about half a second after watching Koneko fall. He didn't even remember crossing the distance. His knuckles were bleeding through the red armor plating. He didn't care. He dropped to his knees beside her, and his hands were already moving, checking, hovering over her like he was terrified to touch the wrong place and make something worse. Her uniform was shredded along her left side. The skin beneath was an angry, scorched red, the kind of burn that came from corrupted spiritual energy rather than fire a euro. Meaner, slower to heal, resistant to standard devil regeneration. Her white cat ears were flat against her skull. Her tail, normally a controlled, precise thing that moved only when she was concentrating or irritated, was limp. Hey, he kept his voice low, steady, the way he had learned to speak in the last year and a half of being Rias Gremery's adjacent punch machine a euro. Calm on the outside even when everything inside him was screaming. Koneko. Open your eyes. A pause that lasted about 3 of his heartbeats. Then her eyes opened. Gold ember, clear and sharp as always, though there was pain in them that she was already in the process of locking away behind her usual walls. She looked up at him. Her expression didn't change much a euro. It rarely did a euro. But something in the set of her jaw told him she was hurting more than she would ever say out loud. You were about to get hit, she said. Her voice was quieter than usual, slightly strained. I was closer. I know. He exhaled slowly. I know you were. I just a euro. He stopped himself. There were about 15 things he wanted to say, none of them particularly useful right now, most of them embarrassingly emotional for a battlefield debrief. Can you move? Yes. She couldn't quite. He could tell by the slight hitch in her breath when she tried to push herself up. He didn't say anything about it. He simply slid one arm under her shoulders and one under her knees and lifted her, the same way he'd seen Rias carry wounded pieces when no one else was close enough, the same way his mother had carried him when he was small and sick and the world was too big. Koneko went stiff for approximately 1 second a euro. She wasn't used to being carried, wasn't comfortable with it, he knew that a euro. And then something in her gave, a small and quiet surrender, and she let her head rest against his shoulder. Her ears were still flat. I've got you, he said. It wasn't particularly elegant. It didn't need to be. Rias arrived with Akino and Kiba 4 minutes later, which meant the whole story was out within the hour, which meant that by the time they had Koneko settled in the Occult Research Club's private recovery room at the back of the old school building, Issei had received 3 separate lectures about battlefield awareness, one from Rias, measured, worried, delivered with her hands clasped in front of her, one from Akino, sweet-voiced and absolutely terrifying, and one from Kiba, brief, sincere, and somehow worse than the other 2 for its gentleness. He sat outside the recovery room on the floor with his back against the wall, still in his partially dissolved armor plating, dried blood on his knuckles, and said very little during any of them. Asia had gone in to heal Koneko. The corrupted senjutsu burns were resistant but not impossible for a twilight healing sacred gear working carefully and patiently. She had been in there for 40 minutes. Issei had been sitting in the hallway for all 40 of them. Kiba sat down beside him eventually, back against the opposite wall, long legs stretched out. For a while, he didn't say anything, which was one of the things Issei had come to quietly appreciate about him over the past year. He knew when words were the wrong tool. "She's going to be fine," Kiba said finally. Not a comfort, exactly. A fact. He said it like he was certain, because he had seen Asia work before, and he was. "I know," Issei said. "You're still going to sit here until she's up and walking around and you've verified it with your own eyes." "Yeah." Kiba nodded once. "I would too." He left after another few minutes, and Issei went back to the particular quality of silence that comes from sitting outside a door and trying very hard not to think about the specific sound of someone else hitting the ground to protect you. Asia emerged just before midnight, tired around the eyes but steady, her healing magic leaving that faint golden warmth on her skin that it always did after extended use. She looked at Issei and gave him the small, certain smile that meant everything was going to be all right. "She's awake and she's going to be fine," Asia said softly. "The burns are healed. She'll be sore for a day or two but there won't be any lasting damage." She hesitated, then added, with a carefully neutral expression that Issei recognized as Asia trying very hard not to editorialize, "She asked if you were still outside." Issei blinked. "What?" she asked. "If you were still outside." Asia enunciated each word with the gentle patience of someone who had learned that Issei sometimes needed information delivered in small, clear pieces when he was emotionally overwhelmed. "She didn't say anything else. But I thought you should know." She left him with that. He stared at the door for a moment, then knocked twice, soft. "Come in," her voice. Still quiet, still level, still entirely itself. The recovery room was small. One bed, a window that looked out over the dark school grounds, a lamp on the table that threw warm light across the walls. Koneko was sitting up against the headboard, her legs under the blanket, her white cat ears no longer flat but slightly low, which for Koneko meant tired. She was in a plain oversized shirt that must have been pulled from somewhere in the club's supply cabinet. Her silver-white hair was loose around her face. She looked, without the uniform and the combat readiness, very young. She was 17. He sometimes forgot that, with everything else she was. He pulled the chair from the corner of the room and sat beside the bed, forearms on his knees, at a loss for the opening of the conversation in the way that he often was when something mattered too much to approach casually. "How are you feeling?" he managed. "Sore," she said. A pause. "Asia's healing is thorough. She's the best." "Yes." Silence. Outside, the wind moved through the trees on the school grounds. Somewhere down the hallway, a clock ticked. "Issei," Koneko said. Something about the way she said his name, Mayuro. Not Haida, which was what she usually called him, what all of them usually called him, Mayuro. Made him look up sharply. Her eyes were on the window. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her ears had gone from low to fully flat again, and her tail, visible curling out from under the blanket, had wrapped around itself in a tight, self-contained loop that he had come to recognize as her tell for something that was costing her effort to say. "You didn't have to sit in the hallway," she said. "I know. You've been there since we got back." "Yeah." Another silence. Then, very quietly, "Why?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. The honest answer was sitting right there in his chest, straightforward and unambiguous, with none of the usual fog of uncertainty that clouded his feelings about most things. He knew why. He had known why. He was starting to think, for longer than he'd been willing to examine clearly. He watched her profile in the lamplight, the set of her jaw, the slight furrow at her brow, the way her tail had tightened its loop, and he thought, "She stepped in front of that for me. She put herself between me and something that could have seriously hurt her, and she did it without hesitating, without calculation, just moved. Like it was instinct, like it was as simple as breathing." "Because it should have been me," he said. "I should have seen it coming. And instead you got hurt because I didn't, and I needed to." He stopped. I needed to know you were okay. I needed to be close enough to know. She finally turned to look at him. Her expression was doing the thing it sometimes did, the very slight shifts that most people missed because they weren't watching carefully enough. The micro-expressions that told a whole different story from her default blank composure. Right now there was something in her eyes that he couldn't quite name, something that sat at the edge of what he understood about her. It wasn't your fault, she said. Koneko. Issei. Again, his first name. Deliberate. The flat press of her ears deepened. I stepped in because I wanted to. Not because you failed. A very small pause, barely perceptible. I didn't want you to get hurt. The words landed quietly. He absorbed them. There was something in the way she said that last sentence. I didn't want you to get hurt. That was slightly different from the way she talked about protecting any other member of the peerage. He wasn't sure if he was reading into it. He was very afraid of reading into it wrong. I didn't want you to get hurt either, he said, because it was true and because he couldn't think of anything more complete than that. Her tail uncurled slightly. It moved, almost unconsciously, toward the edge of the bed in his direction, then caught itself and stilled. Her ears shifted. Still low, but the flatness had eased. There's something I need to say, she said. The words came out measured, as if she had been considering exactly how to arrange them for some time. And I don't. I'm not good at saying things like this, so I'm going to say it once, and I need you to listen, and then you can. Say whatever you want. Issei sat very still. Okay. Her eyes went back to the window. A breath in. A breath out. I think about you differently than I think about the others, she said. In the peerage, I've been noticing for a while that when something happens to you in a fight, my reaction is different from my reaction when something happens to anyone else. She frowned slightly, not at him, at the window, at the words. It's faster. It's louder. And today, when I saw that attack coming for you, I didn't think at all. I just moved, and that's not. I don't process things that way normally. I calculate. I assess. But with you. She stopped. Her tail had moved again, drifted off the edge of the bed, and this time it didn't pull back. It hung in the air beside his chair. I like you, she said. Quiet, direct, stripped of all ornamentation. I like you in a way that makes me act without thinking, which I don't like, but the feeling itself. I don't want it to stop. She looked at him then, finally, fully. I thought you should know. The silence that followed was the specific variety that Issei associated with moments that were shifting something large and permanent. He was aware of his own heartbeat. He was aware of the lamp's warmth, and the clock down the hallway, and the fact that Koneko Tuju, who was one of the most privately composed people he had ever met, had just handed him something she clearly guarded with enormous care. He thought about the last year and a half. He thought about the small things. The way she had started sitting closer to him at club meetings without either of them commenting on it, the way she had once, in the middle of a conversation about something entirely unrelated, handed him the last piece of her snack without looking at him, the way she had shown up at his locker once with his forgotten textbook, and then walked away before he could say thank you, ears visibly red. He thought about how she laughed. Not often, not loudly, just a small, private sound she made sometimes when he did something ridiculous. A sound she didn't seem to realize she was making. He thought about the warehouse floor, and the sound of her hitting it. I like you too, he said. I don't. I'm not the most aware guy in the world, you know that. But somewhere in the last year I stopped thinking of you as a teammate I need to look out for and started thinking of you as someone I really don't want the world to be without, he exhaled. Someone I think about a lot. Someone I look for first when we come back from a fight to make sure she's okay. I didn't really let myself look at it straight on because I wasn't sure if it was. He trailed off, made a frustrated gesture. I'm saying this badly. No, Koneko said. You're not. Her tail, the one that had been hanging beside his chair, curled once around his wrist. It was the lightest, most tentative touch, so careful it could have been accidental. Except that her eyes were on him and they were not accidental at all. Her ears had lifted, slowly, from their low position, not all the way up, but no longer flat. He didn't move. He let her tail rest there. So, he said after a moment. What do we euro? What do you want to do with this? She considered him. The considering look on Koneko's face was one of his favorite things about her, though he never said it out loud. Euro. The way she actually thought before she spoke, no performance of consideration, genuine assessment. I'd like to see what this is, she said finally. If you want to. I want to, he said. No hesitation. He was very rarely certain of things in the way that mattered, in the way that stuck, but this had that quality. I really want to. Something changed in her face. Barely perceptible. The walls didn't come down. Euro. They wouldn't, not fully, not yet. Euro. But something in them softened. And slowly, so slowly it took him a moment to register what was happening, a small sound started. Low, rhythmic, almost too quiet to hear. She was purring. She seemed to realize it at exactly the moment he did, and her expression flashed through something mortified before she arrested it, and returned her face to neutral, though her ears went fully red. He didn't laugh. He wanted to euro. Not meanly, not at her, but at the complete perfection of the moment, at the fact that this serious, self-contained, quietly extraordinary person was sitting in a recovery room bed with her tail around his wrist, blushing to the tips of her ears, and purring. He held it together, because he understood that she would probably never forgive him if he laughed right now, and he wanted very much for there to be a future in which she trusted him with more things like this. I didn't hear anything, he said. A pause. Good, she said. He stayed until she fell asleep, which took less time than he expected. Euro. The healing had taken more out of her than she let on, and once the conversation was done, and some unnameable tension had resolved itself, her eyes grew heavy within 20 minutes. She didn't ask him to stay. She also didn't tell him to leave. He sat in the chair with her tail still loosely resting near his hand, and he stayed until her breathing went slow and even, and her ears, even in sleep, had stayed in their newly lifted position. He turned off the lamp when he left. He walked home through the cold night with his hands in his pockets, the faint remnant warmth of her tail still on his wrist, and he thought, this is going to be something real. He wasn't wrong. The morning after was a study in occult research club behavior at its most concentrated. Rias Gremery had, at some point between Issei leaving the school building and arriving the next day, been informed. He suspected Asia, not out of malice but out of an absolute inability to keep emotionally significant information to herself when she was happy. Rias was sitting in her chair in the club room with an expression that managed to be simultaneously regal and suspiciously bright-eyed. Issei, she said, as he walked in. Morning, he said, with the wariness of a man who had learned to read Rias Gremery's vocal tones. I understand something significant happened last night, she said. In the recovery room. After the mission. Some things were said, yeah? And? Her composure was holding but just barely. He could see the edge of it trembling. And Koneko and I are euro. We're going to be spending more time together. Differently than before, he met her eyes. If that's okay. I know she's your piece and you're my king, and if this is a problem, euro. Issei. Ria stood up from her chair and crossed the room and hugged him with an abruptness and force that knocked the breath out of him. If you hurt her, I will end you with my destruction without a second thought. She stepped back, eyes genuinely glistening. But I think you might be exactly what she needs, and I'm very happy. Thank you, he managed. This is very touching, Aquino said from the window, where she had been standing in complete silence long enough that Issei had failed to register her presence. Her smile was the specific variety that lived in the territory between genuinely warm and absolutely predatory. Koneko-chan finally fell for our hopeless pervert. I thought it would take another year at least. I'm not hopeless, Issei said. You absolutely are, Aquino said, with great fondness. It's one of your charms. Kiba arrived and looked between Issei and Rias and made a rapid, accurate assessment of the situation, as he always did. He extended a hand to Issei. Congratulations, he said simply. Issei shook it. Thanks, man. You should know, Kiba added, quietly enough that only Issei caught it, that she talked about you before, when she thought no one was paying attention. Small things. But often. Issei, had no idea what to do with that information except let it settle somewhere warm in his chest and stay there. Asia appeared last, slightly breathless from having run from the classroom, and grabbed both of Issei's hands in hers with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy. "I'm so happy," she said. "I'm so happy, Issei-san. She's going to be so a hero. She deserves someone who looks for her first, you know? You always look for her first." He opened his mouth to say something. Koneko walked into the room. She was in her full uniform, composed, her cat ears in their usual position, her expression her typical neutral. She looked entirely like herself. There was no visible trace of last night except that, Issei noticed, she had walked through the door and then adjusted her path without seeming to think about it so that she was walking toward him rather than toward her usual seat in the corner. She stopped beside him. She was a head shorter than him. She looked up at him briefly, and then at the rest of the room. At Ryusa's glistening eyes, Akino's delighted smile, Kiba's nod, Asia's clasped hands, and took in the situation with the speed and accuracy that characterized everything she did. "You all already know," she said. "Asia," Issei said. "Asia," Koneko confirmed, without heat. "I'm sorry," Asia said, not sounding particularly sorry. "I'm not sorry. I'm a little sorry. I'm not sorry." Koneko considered this. Then she turned back to Issei, and the corners of her mouth made the smallest, most private movement upward that he had come to recognize, in recent months, as her real smile. The one she didn't hand out freely, the one she saved for things that actually mattered. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. Her hand found his, briefly, fingers touching and then pulling back. Not quite a hold, not quite a nothing, a beginning. Around them, the Occult Research Club collectively pretended not to notice with the theatrical subtlety of people who were noticing extremely hard. Outside the window, Ku Academy's grounds were bright with morning light, ordinary and familiar and entirely unchanged. Issei Hayate stood in it, next to the small, white-eared, silver-haired person who had stepped in front of a blast meant for him without thinking twice, and thought, yeah, this is the start of something. He had no idea, then, how far that something would go. How many years, how many fights, how many quiet evenings and loud mornings, how many small hands that would someday reach up to grab his fingers with cat ears and his eyes and her mother's unshakable composure. He had no idea, then, about any of it. But it was starting, right here in this room, with morning light and the sound of his friends badly pretending not to watch. It was starting. Glad you enjoyed it. Here's Chapter 2 continuing the story. Chapter 2, The Curious Case of Cat Ears, 9 Lives of Love. A high school DxD fan fiction. The thing about dating Koneko Tuju, Issei Hayate discovered in the first week, was that it looked almost exactly like not dating Koneko Tuju. Except for the moments when it absolutely, unmistakably didn't. On the surface, nothing had changed. She still sat in the corner of the Occult Research Club room with a snack in her hand and an expression that suggested the outside world was mildly beneath her consideration. She still delivered her assessments of enemy threats in the same flat, precise voice she had always used. She still walked to school through the same route, arrived at the same time, and greeted approximately no one in the hallway with anything beyond a minimal nod. But she had started sitting next to Issei at the club table instead of across from him. It was subtle. The first time it happened, 2 days after the recovery room conversation, she simply walked in, looked at the table, and chose the chair beside him rather than her usual spot. No announcement, no explanation. She set her snack down, opened her book, and proceeded to give every impression of a person who had always sat in that exact chair and found the question of why mildly offensive. Issei said nothing. He shifted his papers slightly to give her more room. She glanced at him, the quickest possible glance, and then went back to her book. Akino, from across the table, caught Issei's eye and smiled with the specific warmth of someone thoroughly enjoying a private joke. He looked away before she could make it worse. The second change was smaller still. Koneko had always, occasionally, shared food with people in the club. A portion of this, a piece of that, entirely at random and without comment, which everyone had learned to accept without making a fuss about because making a fuss caused her to stop. But now she had a habit of holding things out to Issei first. Not always. Not dramatically, just €1. First. Before anyone else, before she ate the rest herself, she would extend whatever was in her hand slightly in his direction and wait. He always took it. He had learned very quickly that refusing caused the ears to flatten, and he was developing what he privately recognized as a possibly irrational commitment to keeping her ears in the lifted position. "She's marking you," Akino informed him on Thursday, appearing at his elbow in the hallway with the silent precision she deployed specifically when she wanted to be maximally unsettling. "Nikomata do it. It's territorial. She's transferring her scent through shared food and proximity. You smell like her now, which tells everyone else €1. Akino," Issei said. €1. That you belong to her, Akino. I'm being educational. You're being you, which is a different thing." He looked at her sideways. "Does she know she's doing it?" Akino tilted her head, thoughtful. "Probably half and half. Nikomata instincts run deep, especially in someone with Kaneko-chan's lineage. Some of it is conscious choice, some of it is just," she made a small gesture, "nature. It's actually quite sweet, if you look at it right." Issei spent the rest of Thursday looking at it right and arriving at the conclusion that yes, it was actually quite sweet, and also that he was going to need to learn significantly more about Nikomata culture if he was going to do this properly. The education came, somewhat inevitably, from Rias. She called him into her private study on Friday evening under the pretense of reviewing the mission report from the warehouse incident, which was a pretense both of them understood to be transparent, since Kiba had already filed the mission report 2 days ago and Rias had signed it the same afternoon. She was sitting at her desk with a cup of tea and an expression of someone who had been waiting for an excuse to have this conversation. "Sit down," she said. He sat. "I want to talk to you about Koneko," she said. "I figured." Rias set down her tea. She was in her casual clothes, the formal school president persona set aside, and in those moments she was €1. Not less herself, but differently herself. More like the older sister figure she had always actually been to him than the king of a devil peerage. "I'm going to tell you some things," she said, "because I know you, and I know that you will learn more by someone telling you directly than by watching and guessing and eventually saying something that accidentally upsets her, even though you'll have meant nothing wrong by it. That's a really specific way to describe a thing that hasn't happened yet," he said. "I'm preventing it from happening." She folded her hands. "Nikomata are not devils," Issei. "I know we're used to thinking of everyone in the peerage as operating roughly the same way, with their own specialties and histories, but Kaneko's nature runs alongside her devil nature in ways that are €1. Significant. Particularly in relationships." He leaned forward. "Tell me," Rias told him. She told him about Nikomata bonding behaviors €1. The territorial marking Akino had already mentioned, but deeper than that, the way Nikomata in genuine emotional attachment began to orient their entire sense of spatial safety around their chosen person. The way Kaneko's instincts would push her, increasingly, to keep him close, to track his position in a room without appearing to place herself between him and sources of perceived threat even in non-combat situations. "It's not possessiveness in the way humans sometimes mean it," Rias said carefully. "It's more like €1. She is building a home. And you are going to be in the center of it. That's how she experiences attachment. For Nikomata, the person they choose is where safety lives." Issei absorbed this. "And the purring?" he asked, before he decided to ask it. Rias looked at him for a moment. "She purred." "I didn't hear anything," he said, reflexively, which was the exact same thing he'd said in the recovery room and made exactly as much sense the second time. Rias's composure developed a hairline crack of amusement. "Purring in a Nikomata," she said, recovering, "is involuntary. They can suppress it, and most of them learn to, because it's considered extremely private. The fact that it happened at all, with you, means €1. She paused. Chose words. "It means you make her feel safe enough that her control slipped." That is not a small thing for Koneko. He thought about the recovery room. The lamp. The quiet. The sound he pretended not to hear and the flash of mortification on her face. "I won't make a big deal of it," he said. "If it happens again. I won't make her uncomfortable." Rias studied him for a moment in the way she sometimes did, the assessing look that had always made him feel like she was checking something internal, some quality she was measuring. Then she nodded once, with the satisfaction of someone whose measurement had come back the way she hoped. Good, she said. That's the right answer. Is there more? There's quite a lot more. She reached for her tea. But some of it she should tell you herself, when she's ready. What I've told you tonight is €1. The framework. The rest you'll learn by paying attention, which I think you'll do. He stood to leave. At the door, Rias's voice came after him. Issei. He turned. She had a very hard time learning to trust people after what happened with her sister, Rias said. The lightness was gone from her voice. She built the walls she has because she needed them to survive. You're not tearing them down, €1. Don't try to tear them down. Just €1. Be somewhere on the other side of them. Consistently. That's what she needs. He nodded. Yeah, he said. I can do that. The weekend arrived, and with it their first attempt at something that could technically be called a date. Though Koneko had not used that word and Issei had learned quickly not to use words she hadn't used first, because it caused the ears to flatten and the tail to go taut, and a conversation that then had to work its way carefully back from wherever it had skidded off to. What she had said on Saturday morning, appearing at his front door at 10 o'clock with her hands in the pockets of her plain dark jacket, was, I'm going to the market. You can come if you want. He had come. The market was a street fair set up 3 blocks from the school, running on weekends through October, the kind with food vendors and small craft stalls and a remarkable quantity of baked goods. Issei had been to it twice before. He had never been to it walking next to Koneko, which turned out to be a significantly different experience. She navigated the crowd the way she did everything €1. Efficiently, with minimal wasted motion, her small stature meaning she moved through gaps he had to angle around. She stopped at a mochi vendor and studied the selections with the focused intensity most people reserved for important decisions. She selected 4 without consulting him, paid, handed him 2, and resumed walking. Thanks, he said. You helped carry the mission equipment last week when my hands were full, she said. This is equivalent. That's how you're framing it? The tips of her ears went the faintest pink. It's accurate. It was not accurate at all, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said so. And Issei ate his mochi and thought about how much he liked walking next to her. She stopped at a stall selling small handmade items €1. Pottery, mainly small glazed pieces, practical things like cups and small bowls. She picked up a tiny ceramic cat figurine and looked at it for a moment, then set it back down with the air of someone who had been caught doing something undignified. He picked it up. It was white, small, simply made, with painted amber eyes. He bought it before she could stop him, which she could technically have done given her speed advantage, but she chose not to. He could tell by the deliberate way she was looking at a completely different part of the stall while he paid. He held it out to her. She looked at it. Then at him. Then she took it, and put it in her jacket pocket, and said nothing, and her tail €1. Visible below the hem of her jacket €1. Curved once slowly, in a shape that he was learning to read as something warm. You don't have to do things like that, she said. I know, he said. I wanted to. It's a waste of money. It cost about as much as a rice ball. Still, Koneko. Thank you, she said. Very quietly, they kept walking. The incident that the rest of the club would later refer to, with varying degrees of fondness and amusement, as the Yamamoto problem happened on Monday. Yamamoto Soda was a third-year student, broad-shouldered, easy smile, the kind of person who moved through the school hallways with the uncomplicated confidence of someone who had never had reason to doubt his own welcome. He was not a bad person. He was also not someone with any particular awareness of supernatural politics, devil territorial instincts, or the specific dynamics of a Nikomata in the early stages of pairing. He stopped Issei in the hallway after second period to return a manga volume he borrowed weeks ago, €1. A completely ordinary transaction that took approximately 45 seconds. Koneko was 12 feet away. Issei registered her presence in his peripheral vision when he saw Yamamoto's easy smile flicker slightly, the way a person's does when they become aware of being looked at in a way that is not entirely comfortable. He turned. Koneko was standing against the lockers. She appeared, to anyone who didn't know her, to be simply waiting. Her expression was its usual neutral. Her ears were angled directly at Yamamoto with the fixed, precise orientation of a tracking system that had acquired a target. Her tail was doing something Issei had not seen it do before. It was very slowly, very deliberately, moving back and forth in a way that was nothing like the quick, irritated flick she used in battle and nothing like the unconscious curl he associated with contentment. It was slow, controlled, deliberate. It was, he realized with a strange lurching recognition, territorial. Is that a euro? Yamamoto started. A friend, Issei said, which was the truth and also the fastest route to ending this. Anyway, thanks for the return, we should get to class a euro. Right, sure. Yamamoto, with the sensible instincts of a person who recognized something unreadable in his environment, and chose not to interrogate it, departed at a comfortable pace. Issei walked over to Koneko. That was Yamamoto, he said. He was returning a manga. I know, she said. He's not a euro. There's nothing there. Obviously. A pause. Her tail slowed its movement. I know that, she said. Logically. But, the ears shifted. He was standing very close to you. He was a normal conversational distance away. It seemed close. Issei looked at her. She was looking at a middle distance past his shoulder, which was her way of indicating she was aware this conversation reflected something she'd prefer not to have reflected too directly. Her ears had gone from tracking mode to the slightly flattened position that meant she was embarrassed about something. He thought about what Rias had said. She is building a home, and you are going to be in the center of it. He thought about what Akino had said. It's territorial. He thought about the machi and the ceramic cat and the chair beside him at the club table. He thought, she is not wrong to feel what she feels. She is just not used to being in something yet. He really was just returning a manga, he said. But I get it. He paused. For what it's worth, a euro. I was looking for you when I turned around. Not at him. Something in her expression shifted. Very slightly. The ears lifted a single notch. That's a very obvious thing to say, she said. I'm a pretty obvious kind of guy. The corner of her mouth moved. Yes, she said. You are. But the way she said it had the quality of something she had chosen carefully. The way she chose most things, a euro. A word that looked simple but had been selected for exactly what it meant. They walked to class 3 feet apart, which was the same distance they had always walked, except that at some point between the lockers and the classroom door her hand brushed his, lightly, once, and didn't pull back quite as quickly as it could have. It was Akino, inevitably, who said the thing out loud that everyone else was thinking. Wednesday afternoon, club meeting, ostensibly about the preliminary report on a new familiar-related disturbance in the Eastern District. Koneko was sitting next to Issei. Her shoulder was very nearly touching his. It had been drifting incrementally closer over the course of the meeting in a way that had the quality of continental drift, a euro. Technically observable, easily deniable, completely continuous. Koneko-chan, Akino said in the voice that always arrived slightly ahead of something terrible, you're purring. The room went very still. Koneko went very still. She was, in fact, purring. Issei had been aware of it for about 3 minutes, had been sitting with complete physical composure and staring directly at the mission report, and absolutely refusing to acknowledge it with even the most peripheral change of expression because he had committed to not making her uncomfortable about this, and he was a man of his word. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I wasn't, Koneko said. You were, Akino said pleasantly. Akino, Rias said, with the tone of a person managing a situation. I'm just noting, a euro. You're just noting yourself into a very specific kind of trouble, Kiba said from across the table, with the equanimity of a person who had learned to serve as the calm current in Akino's wake. It's sweet, Asia said earnestly. It's a very sweet sound. I think it means she's happy. Koneko's ears were the particular shade of red that Issei was privately beginning to think of as her most genuine color. Her tail had gone into its tight self-contained loop again. Issei turned, slightly, and said to no one in particular, and everyone specifically, I didn't hear anything. A pause. Koneko's tail uncurled, just fractionally. The red in her ears didn't fade, a euro. It was going to take more than 12 seconds for that, a euro. But the particular quality of her stillness changed from mortified to something else. Thank you, she said, extremely quietly. Sure, he said. Across the table, Rias pressed her fingertips over her mouth and looked at the ceiling in the manner of someone making a private, emotional inventory. Kiba studied the mission report with great attention. Asia made a soft sound that was entirely too close to a squeal for anyone's dignity. Akino smiled with the luminous, uncomplicated warmth she reserved for things she actually found genuinely wonderful, rather than just entertainingly chaotic. The meeting continued. Koniko's shoulder settled the remaining half-inch into contact with Issei's arm. Either of them moved away. Outside, October was turning the school grounds gold and red, the late afternoon light slanting through the clubroom windows in long warm angles that caught the dust and made everything look slightly like something out of a memory. Issei thought, 1 week. It has been 1 week and she shares food with me and I look for her first, and she purrs when she doesn't mean to and I wouldn't trade any of it. He thought about 9 lives €. The old human idea, the lucky number, the way cats seemed to carry more existence than they had any right to. He thought, yeah? I've got time. We've got time. He didn't know yet that they would need it, all of it, every year and every fight and every quiet moment €. That what was beginning in this ordinary, extraordinary week was something that would grow into a household and a family and a love that would outlast every enemy faction that tried to touch it. He just knew it felt like something real, which was, for now, exactly enough. The request came through official channels, which was the first sign that something was wrong. Standard threat assessments for code territory came through Rias's network €. Informal, fast, delivered by familiar or direct communication, the kind of thing that arrived over breakfast or between classes with the casual efficiency of a system that had been running long enough to stop being precious about protocol. Official channels meant paperwork. Official channels meant the underworld's administrative infrastructure had decided something warranted formal classification. Official channels meant that whatever was happening, it had already been happening long enough for multiple parties to notice it and determine it was too large for any single peerage to handle quietly. The document arrived Thursday morning, stamped with the seal of Sirzek's Lucifer's office and handed to Rias by a familiar she didn't recognize €. Compact, quick, gone before she could ask questions. She read it at the club table, while everyone else ate breakfast, and she went progressively more still in the way that Issei had come to associate with her processing something she didn't like. There have been attacks, she said, when she'd finished. On Nikomata. 4 confirmed in the past 3 weeks, 2 in Japan, 1 in the eastern underworld territories, 1 in the human world near Kyoto. In each case the target was isolated, the senjutsu energy was €. Extracted. She paused on the word, the professional precision of it sitting uneasily in the warm, ordinary breakfast light. The faction responsible hasn't been identified yet, but the method is consistent. They're using a hybrid technique €. Part jujutsu, part something else that the Mao's researchers haven't been able to classify yet. The table was quiet. Issei looked at Koneko. She was looking at the document in Rias's hands with an expression that was doing the thing €. The flatness that wasn't really flatness, the stillness that had too much in it. Her ears were in a neutral position, but her tail had gone still in the specific way it went still when she was calibrating something internally, measuring and deciding. The targets, she said. Her voice was level. Profile? Young, Rias said, after a moment. All under 30. All with above-average senjutsu capacity. A pause, almost imperceptible. One of them was your age. Something in Koneko's jaw set. They're harvesting potential, she said. Not a question. That's the working theory. Nikomata's senjutsu at high capacity has properties that most other spiritual energy doesn't, Koneko said, the way she always delivered technical information €. Flat, precise, impersonal, like she was reading from a document rather than talking about something she had personal stake in. It can be used as a catalyst for certain kinds of barrier magic that are otherwise unstable. And she stopped. Her tail moved, once. There are techniques in the darker corners of Jiu-Jitsu that use Nikomata energy specifically because of how it interacts with life force. It's difficult to replicate with anything else. I know, Rias said quietly. So they'll keep going, Koneko said. Until they have what they need or someone stops them. Yes. Another silence. Then Koneko looked up from the table and her eyes moved, briefly and without any apparent intention, to Issei. It lasted less than a second. She looked back at Rias. What's the assignment? She said. The assignment was, on paper, reconnaissance. Rias was careful to frame it that way €. The Mao's office wanted information before they committed full resources. They wanted confirmation of the faction's identity and method. They wanted eyes on the situation from a trusted peerage with local territory knowledge. Reconnaissance. Observe and report. Do not engage unless engagement is unavoidable. Issei had been doing this long enough to know that do not engage unless engagement is unavoidable translated, in practical terms, to engagement is probably unavoidable. The lead was a location on the northern edge of Koa's territory, a disused shrine complex that had been abandoned decades ago, when the priesthood maintaining it died out, and no one took up the succession. Shrines like that places that had once been nodes of genuine spiritual practice and then gone quiet sometimes attracted things. The energy didn't disappear when the practice stopped. It just sat there, ungoverned, interesting to things that knew how to use it. Ria sent Issei and Koneko. She had reasons for the specific pairing that she didn't fully articulate, and didn't need to They were the combination with the most relevant capability set for the target type, Koneko's senjutsu sensitivity, and Issei's raw power and regeneration. It was tactically sensible. It was also, Issei thought, Rias being Rias, which meant there was probably a secondary layer of thought underneath the tactical one that he didn't need to examine too closely. They went in the hour before midnight, dressed in ordinary clothes rather than uniforms because approaching a potentially hostile location in recognizable devil peerage gear was the kind of announcement that made reconnaissance harder. Dark clothes, practical shoes, no visible markers. Koneko had her hair down rather than in its usual style, which Issei noticed and then made a deliberate effort not to notice too obviously because he was a man with a goal and the goal was not getting distracted. The shrine complex was about what he'd expected a main hall with a collapsed section of roof, several smaller outbuildings in varying states of structural integrity, stone paths overtaken by grass and moss, the old torii gate at the entrance still standing but weathered to a pale, stripped gray. The spiritual atmosphere was what Koneko had described, old energy, ungoverned, sitting quiet and heavy in the air like a smell you couldn't quite identify. She felt it before he did, because she always felt things before he did when senjutsu was involved. Her pace slowed. Her ears moved, angling forward and then rotating slightly, independent of each other, tracking sources he couldn't detect. 3 of them, she said low. Inside the main hall. They've already set the anchor points for whatever they're building. A pause. There's someone else. A 4th signature Different. Weaker, like a Her expression shifted, something tightening in it. There's a victim. Someone's already in there. The reconnaissance framing dissolved. Can you tell if they're alive? He asked. Yes. Her ears were fully forward now, locked. Barely. He looked at her. She looked at him. The decision existed between them for approximately 1 second, and then they were both moving. The main hall of the shrine was large enough that the collapsed section of roof left a gap through which the night sky showed, cold stars and a half-moon throwing pale light across the floor. The anchor points Koneko had detected were visible once Issei knew to look for them. 4 objects placed at calculated intervals, each one emitting a slow, dark pulse that made the air around them feel wrong in a way he associated with techniques that were doing something to the fundamental rules of a space. 3 figures. 2 of them were clearly muscle big, standing in defensive positions near the hall's entrance, the kind of presence that radiated capability rather than finesse. The 3rd was different, smaller, older, positioned at the center of the anchor points arrangement, focused entirely on the working they were building in the middle of the hall. The victim was suspended. Not physically There were no chains, no restraints but held in something Issei couldn't see, a technique that kept them motionless and vertical about 3 feet off the floor. A girl, young, maybe 15, dark hair and a half-visible tail that had gone limp. Nikomata. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her energy being slowly, methodically drained by the working surrounding her. Koneko saw her, and went very still beside Issei, the kind of stillness that preceded action rather than inaction. He could see her jaw working slightly, the thing she did when she was processing something that was hitting instinct rather than intellect. One of the muscle figures turned. Saw them. The game was over. Reconnaissance is done, Issei said. Yes, Koneko said and moved. She hit the first guard so fast that Issei's brain catalogued it as a series of still images rather than continuous motion. She was at the entrance, then she was past it, then the guard was traveling backward through the hall with a trajectory that suggested substantial force had been applied to a very specific point. The second guard reacted well, trained reflexes, pivoting to intercept, but Koneko had already redirected, dropping low, senjutsu flowing up through her arms in the golden shimmer he recognized as her serious mode, and the second guard met the floor hard. Issei was already moving toward the technician at the center, boosted gear manifesting along his arm with the familiar voice Airo. Boost, power doubling, the pressure of it expanding outward. The technician looked up from their working, and instead of breaking concentration they did something Issei hadn't expected. They completed a gesture, fast and deliberate, and the anchor points pulsed simultaneously, and the entire working shifted, not toward him. Toward Koneko. It was targeted. Of course it was Airo. She was the Nikomata. She was what they were designed to harvest. The pulse of dark energy redirected in the space of a breath, sweeping across the hall toward her in a wave that was less like an attack and more like a net. Koneko saw it coming. He could tell by the way she planted her feet and raised her guard. She was going to try to take it, absorb it, tank through on her senjutsu reinforcement, which she could probably almost do, which meant she would almost survive it, which was not Airo. He moved without thinking, not in front of her. Not the way she had done for him in the warehouse, putting herself between him and the incoming. He moved differently. Airo. He moved to her, got his arm around her, got the boosted gear between them and the incoming wave, and in the moment before the energy hit he did something he had never done before because he had never been in exactly this configuration before, this particular position. Airo. Close enough to touch her, close enough to feel the warmth of her senjutsu radiating through his arm where it pressed against her side, in enough danger that every instinct he had was firing simultaneously. Drake's voice, for the first time in a long time, sounded surprised. Partner. Something is happening. Hold on. The wave hit. The boosted gear absorbed it. That was normal. That was what the gauntlet did. It took power in and multiplied. But what happened next was not normal. The senjutsu in the wave, the harvesting technique, hit the connection between the gauntlet and Kaneko's own energy radiating through his arm, and instead of being neutralized it was processed. Transformed. The boosted gear doubled it, the way it doubled everything, and then instead of accumulating it in the gauntlet it redirected outward, back toward Koneko, amplified, and her senjutsu flared. Visibly, physically flared. Gold-white light, sharp and clean, the energy signature that Issei associated with her serious output but brighter, larger, wrong scale for what she'd been running a moment ago. It flooded through her in an instant, and she made a sound he'd never heard her make before. Not pain, not effort, something else. Something like when a door you've been pushing against suddenly opens and you almost fall through. She caught herself. She looked at her hands. At him. At the light still radiating off her. The technician had stumbled backward, the sudden reversal of their own technique disrupting whatever control they'd been maintaining. The suspended girl dropped 6 inches before the working caught her, flickering, unstable. What the hell was that? Issei demanded internally. I believe, Drake said, with the particular weight of someone revising their understanding of a situation, that we have discovered something new. The boosted gear appears to have a resonance with Nikomata Senjutsu, under specific conditions. The amplification transferred through genuine emotional connection. I have not seen this before. Genuine emotional. You were afraid for her, Drake said simply. Not tactically. Personally. The gear responded to it. Across the hall, Koneko had looked up from her hands. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face. Not exactly surprise, because Koneko didn't do surprise the way other people did, but something that was in the same territory. Assessment layered over something warmer. Issei, she said. Yeah, he said. We'll figure it out later. Can you move? She rolled her shoulders, testing the energy in her, getting a sense of what was there. More than before, she said, with the flatness of someone reporting a fact that was weird but not unwelcome. Then let's finish this. The technician, without both guards and with a disrupted working and an Nikomata running energy levels they hadn't planned for, lasted approximately 4 minutes. They were skilled Euro. The technique they'd been building was genuinely sophisticated, the kind of thing that represented real knowledge and real preparation Euro. But skill and preparation have limits when the variables change significantly enough, and Koneko with amplified senjutsu was a significant variable. She brought them down carefully, which Issei appreciated Euro. Not out Euro. Incapacitated, available for the Mao's office to collect and question. He brought down the anchor points, Drake helping him identify the structural connections and the order that wouldn't cause a catastrophic collapse of whatever residual energy was pulled in them. The suspended girl came down as the working dissolved. Koneko caught her before she hit the floor, with the speed and precision she applied to everything, and lowered her to the ground and checked her over with steady, efficient hands. The girl was unconscious, but her energy signature was intact Euro. Drained, depleted, but not permanently damaged, she would recover. Koneko sat back on her heels and looked at the girl for a moment. Her ears were in a position Issei couldn't quite read Euro. Not the battle focus angle, not the low tired angle, something in between that he thought might be relief expressing itself in the only way she had available. He crouched beside her. She's okay, he said. Yes, Koneko said. She will be, he radioed Rias. Logistics were set in motion Euro. Collection of the incapacitated technician, care for the victim, cleanup of the shrine's residual energy, the kind of aftermath that ran itself once you initiated it, leaving them in the hall with the night sky through the broken roof and the quiet that follows the end of a fight. Koneko was still looking at where the girl had been suspended. She said without turning, what you did? With the boosted gear. I don't fully understand it yet, he said, but Drake said Euro, that it responds to genuine emotion. When the feeling is real enough, strong enough, and the senjutsu is in contact Euro, it amplifies. He paused. Specifically your senjutsu. Through me. She was quiet for a moment. That's a very specific combination. Yeah, it only works because of Euro. She stopped. Restated. It's conditional on the emotional connection being genuine. That's what he said. A silence. Koneko turned to look at him. Her ears were in the lifted position. Her tail was doing the slow, warm curve that he'd learned to read. In the moonlight through the broken roof she looked Euro. Not different from how she always looked, but more visible somehow, like better lighting was revealing something that had always been there. Then it will always work, she said. Quiet, direct, matter-of-fact in the way that she delivered things that were enormous by making them sound simple. He felt the thing in his chest that he was still getting used to, the particular weight of caring about someone this much. The way it had texture and gravity and didn't feel at all like the romantic ideals he'd constructed in his head over years of crushes and fantasies. This was different. This was specific. This was Koneko. Yeah, he said. It will. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked back at the broken roof and the stars. He sat beside her on the shrine floor, their shoulders touching, and they waited for Rias's people to arrive. Later Euro. Much later, after the debrief and the filing and the satisfied call from an official in Surzex's office who was professionally restrained about it but clearly pleased with the outcome Euro. They stood on the roof of Ko Academy. It was where they ended up sometimes, without planning to. It had become a place without explicitly being decided as one Euro. High enough to see the whole town laid out in its nighttime grid of lights, private enough that no one came up without reason, open to the sky in a way that felt different from the rest of the school's enclosures. Issei was sitting on the low ledge at the roof's edge. Koneko was standing a few feet away, looking out over the lights of Ko. Her hair was still down. The moonlight was doing the thing with her ears that it did with anything silver-white, turning them luminous. Today was different, she said. Yeah, the technique they were using. The harvesting. She was quiet for a moment. I've heard of things like it before. My sister Euro. The word had the careful weight it always had when she said it. She knew people who used that kind of practice. At the edges of the world she was in before. Her tail moved. It's not a new idea. It's just someone with enough knowledge and enough disregard for the people they're taking from. We stopped this group, he said. This group. Her voice was level, acknowledging the implication without flinching from it. Then we'll stop the next one, he said. And the one after. She turned to look at him. You say that very easily. Because I mean it very easily. He met her eyes. I'm not going to let anyone touch you. I know you can handle yourself, Euro. I know you probably don't need me to say that, Euro. But I'm saying it anyway. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. A long pause. She looked at him with the assessment expression, the one that was reading something internal, and then she crossed the distance between them and sat beside him on the ledge, close enough that her shoulder was against his. It works both ways, she said. I know. He thought about the warehouse floor, about the sound of her going down. I know it does. The moon was high and the town below them was quiet and small and full of ordinary people living ordinary lives in the shadow of things they couldn't see. He thought about that sometimes, Euro. The way Ko sat oblivious beneath all of it, beneath the peerage and the factions and the fights and the careful machinery of supernatural politics. There was something he appreciated about that. Something worth protecting. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It was the first time she had done that, Euro. Not the brush of proximity, not the gradual drift, but a deliberate lean, a chosen rest. His breath did something. He kept his face composed. Her purring started so softly it was barely a sound, more a vibration where her head rested against him. He didn't say a word. He looked out over the lights of Ko and felt the warmth of her against his shoulder and thought, this is exactly where I want to be. The moonlight lay across the roof in a long silver sheet, and somewhere below them the town went about its ordinary business, and above them the stars continued their ancient indifferent mathematics. And between all of it 2 people sat on a roof and were, quietly, completely, exactly where they were supposed to be. He turned his head slightly, just enough to press his lips to her hair, Euro. So light it barely counted, so light she could have pretended not to notice. She didn't pretend not to notice. She turned her face up, just slightly, and he met her there, and it was brief and soft and unhurried, their first real kiss, tasting like the cold night air and something warmer underneath it. And when they pulled back her ears were red to the very tips and she was